Well, again, good morning. I thought maybe I could run through quickly the countries that were designated under the Act earlier this year, as was mentioned, and then the recent issuance by the President of waivers with respect to some of those countries, and go into the rationale behind them and the effect of those waivers, and then we'll go to the questions. The countries that got designated this year by the Secretary were Burma, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. So that's the universe. Those were the countries that, through our annual reporting process, were determined that the governments were either themselves recruiting into the armed forces child soldiers, or were supporting militias or other paramilitary groups or something that contained in there that recruited child soldiers. One notable omission from that list this year is Chad, which had been on the list in past years, but made significant efforts and managed to stop recruitment of child soldiers. So they left the list, and that's a good news story from our standpoint. So that determination was made earlier in the year that those were the countries, and it's based on facts. As our embassies are reporting, are there child soldiers being recruited or not? The more recent determination process, which was the results of which were rolled out a couple days ago, was done by the President. And that is, under the Act, he has authority to waive the application of the sanctions for national interest reasons. And that was done in some cases and not others. In the case of Sudan, Burma, and Syria, no waiver was issued or determined to be warranted. In 3 countries, the President waived the application of the law in toto, waived the sanctions in toto. But that doesn't mean, I want to emphasize, that means an unlimited flow of security assistance to those countries. The way the Act works, it puts sanctions on your use of certain authorities under the Foreign Assistance Act. So, like international military education training, that is one of the authorities there. That when you designate a country, it gets cut off from any kind of IMET. So if you want to do some kind of IMET, you have to do a waiver, and then you can, either through policy or other declared measures, you can expand or limit that as is warranted. So the 3 that got so-called full waivers are Rwanda, Somalia, and Yemen. And then Central African Republic, DRC, and South Sudan got partial waivers. So let me explain a little bit the nature of the partial waivers and then the full waivers, what was going on in those countries, so that you get some sense of why we did what we did, and then we'll open it up for questions. For the partial waiver countries, one of which was Central African Republic, and as you may know, what's been going on there is that they're trying to stand up a new professional military force. It's a place where the military forces had completely disintegrated. And so as they try to do that, we waived it for the purpose, assuming that the transitional government, the government there, is able to put together the beginnings of a force and start to create a professional force. We want to be in a position to support that. So we said, if that comes to pass, and if they are carrying out the UN Security Council mandate for MINUSCA, the mission there, which includes a provision on elimination of child soldiers, then we waive to the extent necessary to support that effort. So it's a limited waiver, and it's contingent, in effect, on those developments coming to pass. But those are developments that we and the international community generally desire to see in Central African Republic. Democratic Republic of Congo has taken quite a few steps to reduce the recruitment of child soldiers. They in October of 2012, they signed a UN action plan. They appointed a special advisor in July of this year to the president on recruitment of child soldiers, and they've worked with child protection actors to separate children from armed groups. So there's quite a bit of activity going on there. Issued some directives, and the overall result has been diminishment in the recruitment of child soldiers. So the thinking was that warranted a partial waiver to allow us to basically support the professionalization efforts within the military, of which the eliminating recruitment of child soldiers is one. And also we have interest there in maintaining their capacity in counter piracy, counter drug trafficking, and illegal fishing, and their effort against the Lord's Resistance Army. So those are, again, the waiver is tailored to allow us to support those objectives without just being an open-ended provision of assistance to that country. And then finally, the Republic of South Sudan, again, a partial waiver. South Sudan continues to have terrible problems on child soldiers. So what we did here was to say we are giving a limited waiver for the purpose, one, of supporting the monitoring and verification mission under the ceasefire agreement that's been reached. We tried to figure out a way to do this without a waiver, but there wasn't. In order to be able to provide, the South Sudanese military provides transport and other logistics to support the monitoring and verification mission. And in order for us to be able to give them the wherewithal to do that, we had to waive, but we waived for that very narrow purpose, and also for the purpose of there's basing of some of the regional forces that are fighting against the LRA are based out of stage out of South Sudan, and again we support that. So we made a waiver that allows us to do those two specific things, but nothing more than that. So those are the partial waiver countries. The full waiver country, Rwanda. Rwanda was on the list because of its support for M23. It wasn't that the Rwandan forces themselves were recruiting child soldiers, but they were providing financial and logistic support to an armed group that was. During the year, and perhaps not out of their own will, but M23 has ceased to they've ceased to support M23 at this point. So the activity that gave rise to their designation is no longer occurring. And again, this is not something where, even though it's a full waiver, our intent is to provide a limited IMET for professionalization of the military, giving training on civilian control of the military, human rights, military justice, and also to allow Rwanda to participate in peacekeeping missions. It's a very important component of the peacekeeping mission in Darfur, for example. And so that's what we had in mind there. Somalia, child soldiers recruitment remains a problem, but the scale of the problem has reduced significantly according to UN reports during the year. The government there signed some standard operating procedures for the reception and handover of children. They established a dedicated child protection unit. So on one side, they've made some progress, some significant progress on child soldiers, although not enough to get them off the list. And on the other side, of course, they're in a very difficult struggle at this point with terrorist groups, and we want to support that effort. So that was the rationale for the waiver in that case. And then finally, Yemen, again, an important partner in counterterrorism efforts. It's and again a country that has taken significant steps to reduce the use of child soldiers. They haven't been fully effective yet, so that's why they're still on the list. But their tendency is in the right direction. They signed a joint action plan with the UN to end the recruitment and use of child soldiers, basically, the trade-off was that if you completely stopped security assistance at this time, you jeopardize the country that is trying to make some reform. So that was the rationale there. So that is the overview. I think one of the things that's notable before I turn it over for questions is in past years we've tended to just say, okay, full waiver or sometimes a partial waiver, but this year with the ones that you saw, the partial waivers, they're much more tailored than they've been in past years. We're trying to make it clear that when we do a waiver, it's still part of the message on child soldiers, that South Sudan isn't getting a partial waiver because we think they've made an improvement on child soldiers. They're getting a partial waiver only for the purpose of supporting the monitoring and verification mechanism. So that we're trying to be a lot, and Central African Republic, where we're saying that there's a waiver, but it's kind of contingent on positive developments in terms of standing up of professional armed forces and that kind of thing, and not just that was always sort of the policy attitude. We'd make the waiver and then we'd have very tailored policies. But here we're trying to sort of announce those policies at the same time we announce the waiver, to not muddy the message that we're still concerned about child soldiers in those countries where they haven't fully resolved the problem yet. So with that, hopefully that's a decent overview of where we are, and be happy to take your questions.
Can I ask about the questions that you...
Just
sorry.
Identify yourself.
Oh, I apologise, yeah.
Outlet.
Jo Biddle from AFP, Agence France Presse. Could you talk a little bit about the countries where there was no waivers issued? Sudan, Burma, Syria.
Yep.
This is the first time there hasn't been waivers. What is the extent of the problem in each of those countries?
Okay, it's in each of those countries the problem has been bad. We haven't seen significant steps to resolve them, and there weren't any other activities that we wanted to engage in, such as supporting a monitoring mission or something that would have warranted a waiver. I think that, Sudan has made sometimes steps to say that they're going to do things, but but have they haven't really reduced the.
They have been in the process of negotiating an action plan with the
Yeah.
UN for years.
Yeah, but it's not done yet.
Has not been signed yet.
Yeah. So there, it's a big problem. They made a couple of tentative steps, but they haven't really completed the tentative steps, even let alone implemented those agreements. Burma continues widespread use of child soldiers, both by the government and by armed groups, on both sides of the conflict. It's not only the government-supported forces, but that's the reason that the act gets triggered is the government either recruiting into its own armed services or supporting groups that do it. The fact that their opposition is doing it is irrelevant because the act doesn't apply to that. Syria, same kind of deal, where the government is recruiting child soldiers, and obviously we've got no countervailing reasons to want to give security assistance to Syria for any purpose, so that's the rationale there. I think all of those countries have been on the list in previous occasions and have not received waivers.
And are you able to say how much money is involved in each country that's on hold or not being appropriated as a result of these sanctions?
Well, that's a little bit speculative because I can tell you more what monies would actually get done under waivers, if I can find my fact sheet that's here someplace. Because what happens is when you're doing planning, if you know, for example, that Burma, has had a big problem, has been on the sanctions list for some years, and that you're not seeing any change, you don't plan in your budget planning process for funding for Burma. So it's not like the money is set aside and waiting for them to do the right thing. We spend it on other countries that are doing the right thing. And that's so it's to say they lost X amount because of this
Right.
is very very speculative. But in terms of what is likely to go forward under this formula, for example, in Central African Republic, we're talking around $100,000 in IMET. These are ballpark figures, so if
Sure.
it turns out to be 110 or something, don't say I misled you. But that was what the waiver is supposed to allow to go forward if they take the policy steps that I mentioned. For DRC, it's $350,000 in IMET, and an as yet undetermined amount to support maritime security training with the Navy, and some amount to support counter LRA activity. Now, what is also worthwhile to note in these cases is that there's often a big chunk of peacekeeping money that is going to support activities in those countries, which is not affected by CSPA in the first place. So, like for DRC, there's 11 million in peacekeeping operations to support professionalization of their military, but that's not one of the authorities that's affected by the Child Soldiers Prevention Act. Rwanda, we're talking about 350,000 in IMET for resumed professionalization of the military, and then logistical support. Don't have a dollar amount on this yet for their participation in missions, peacekeeping missions in Central African Republic, Somalia, South Sudan, and Darfur. So again, that's not sort of a building capacity type of activity, but it's when their troops are in those places doing peacekeeping operations, well, their troops and other peacekeeping troops there, we tend to supply food, transport, that kind of thing to support them logistically. Somalia, we're talking 200,000 in IMET for continued professionalization of the military. There's a as yet undetermined amount of peacekeeping operations funds for logistics support and salaries and stipends for the Somalian military, and then some DoD counter-terrorism funds. South Sudan, we don't know how much those two very narrow things I mentioned. We haven't priced them out yet, but they're very small amounts of money. Yemen is the big dollars one, where there's the full waiver will free up $25 million in foreign military financing to build the counterterrorism capabilities of their military, and $1.2 million in IMET to continue professionalization of the military. So that's the one where you're seeing some serious dollars being freed up as a result of the waivers. The others are, as I mentioned, pretty small amounts.
We could.
Yep.
My name is Munir Mawari, working for the Al Arabi Al Jadid.
Welcome.
My question about Yemen is, mentioned Yemen. The situation on the ground has changed in the last 2 weeks. The Houthi groups took over the capital, and from their record, do you think the problem is going to be worse, or it's going to change to the better after they are in control?
Well, you're presuming they're going to take control of,
They did already.
yeah, of the capital. But, yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see what I mean. What the sanction applies to is what the behavior was in the last year, and then you have to look at it. Now, whether we want to continue providing for other reasons.
The report talk about the country as a whole, or you have categorized?
Well, it's the report covers the government in power and any groups that they finance or train or direct. It doesn't cover rebel groups fighting against the government or other armed groups that are not being supported by the government. So the government isn't held responsible for groups that it doesn't have some control over, but it does have it with respect to the groups it does finance.
But anyway, this group is using children, and we think that it's the problem is gonna be worse because they are the government now. They
Yeah.
control of the capital. And
I don't know, Mirvan, have we seen any further thinking on that?
I mean, I think to the extent that we will continue to monitor the situation in the event of a government change and evaluate, their recruitment and use of child soldiers. I think with respect to this report, it was looking at recruitment and use by the current government.
Yeah, I mean, this is always built in that there's a lag time in these things because it's March to,
Right? It was April of last year through
yeah,
March.
April to March 30 or something you're applying the sanction based on what happened then, not on what's happening now. Now, that doesn't mean that we will just go ahead and do whatever we would have done before. We took the steps of making the waivers so that we would be able to, we wouldn't be barred by the law from providing assistance. Now, whether it still makes sense to provide assistance as situations on the ground change, that's an ongoing policy decision, not a legal decision.
Do we have another question?
Yeah, this is Mehtap Cholak from Voice of America Turkish Service. I would like to hear more about the situation in Syria. You said government recruiting child soldiers.
Yep.
Do you have any numbers? And or also the rebel groups and the opposition groups are also
Yes?
hiring child, and do you have any number?
We don't have.
No.
Don't have numbers. I mean, I think that was our conclusion, is they're all doing it, but,
Access is difficult. for
yeah,
monitoring.
yeah, we don't exactly have an embassy on the ground at this point.
Do you have any numbers, though, for any of the countries? Like, do you know in Burma, for instance, how many roughly child soldiers are included in the government forces?
With Burma, the only number that we know is how many the government is releasing.
Oh, right.
So they have, since they signed their action plan in 2012, released about 400 child soldiers. We
Right.
don't know how many are still in the government or how many are still being recruited. I believe last year the UN verified about 37 cases of recruitment by the Tatmadaw.
And any of the other
It's-
countries, do you have any numbers for?
We base our estimates off of the Secretary General's report. So the Children in Armed Conflict Working Group develops an annual report to the Secretary General on the situations in 23 countries, and that's where we base a lot of our estimates.
So if I go to the UN Secretary General
Mhm.
site, I'll be able to find some
Yes.
numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as the Burma case tells you, it's, they only catch a certain amount of what's going on. I mean, Burma, it's the sort of the good news there is that they've been releasing child soldiers from the military. The bad news is they continue to recruit them. So it's,
Yeah.
they get credit for releasing them, but then they do the same cycle all over again, and that's why they have not been seen as progressing. So we're hoping that the releases continue and the recruitment stops. But there is a huge disparity between what they've been releasing and how many the UN's been able to detect, and I suspect that that's probably true in other countries as well. That the act, though, doesn't, it isn't a quantity thing. It's if you do it at all.
Even one case would be enough to.
Yeah, although I think you could probably, I don't know if we have a de minimis exception, but,
Right.
even in our country, sometimes people lie about their age and manage to get
Right.
into the military. So if it were, a case like that, where I don't think we'd hold the government to account. But where it's apparent that as a matter of practice and often of policy that they're doing this. And in Burma, a lot of it's forced recruitment too. It's not a case of poor kids lying about their age in order to get into the military and get 3 square meals a day. It's the troops going out and rousting people away from their families and impressing them into service, and so.
I mean, sorry, I don't want to
We have
dominate. Yeah.
one question
Yes,
from our other
Abdul.
Yes,
caller.
sir.
Abdulaziz Osman with the VOA Somali Service. I got a question about the Somalia. You said that child recruitment remains a problem. If the child recruitment remains a problem, why Somalia get the waiver? I mean, was there any other steps that you could take if that problem still exists?
No, there's the waiver. The waiver doesn't mean that they are not guilty of recruiting child soldiers. To the contrary, it means they are, and therefore the sanction in the law would apply but for the waiver. So we're waiving the sanction, not waiving the underlying offense that's being committed. I mean, as I indicated, the rationale was there's been an improvement, even though it's not the complete improvement that would get them off the list. And then second, there's some very strong countervailing issues that you don't want the. I mean, your question implies in some way people tend to look at these things as a judge meting out a punishment for a crime or something like that. In which case you say, well, why don't you apply the same sanction to everyone guilty of that? We look at it more as like a doctor treating a patient. We're trying to help the people in those countries that are trying to improve things to say what can we do to help them get rid of the problem of child soldiers. And you don't want to do something that's going to kill the patient. If you end up having Al-Shabaab take over in Somalia because we couldn't support the government at all, that's not going to help the child soldier problem or any other human rights problem. So it's an effort to, in each case, to try to figure out what's the right prescription that will make them the maximum progress in the right direction without causing some fatal error somewhere else. And I think Somalia is a very good example of it. Somalia and Yemen both were the rationales. We'll see if Yemen survives the experience as yet. But in other cases like Burma and so on, I mean, they've got internal conflicts going on, but they're ones that they should be ending. They're not conflicts for the survival of the country, and they're not dependent on our assistance in any event. So that in that case, there wasn't any reason. They haven't done anything nearly enough to move in the right direction, and there's no real countervailing reason that we need to be doing something to help them on some other human rights problem. So it's that kind of an analysis that goes into each one of these. It's very case-by-case type of...
And you said the fund that the Somalis will get under this law is $200,000. Where is that money coming from?
It's under foreign assistance laws here, and this is international military education and training. So it's a particular authority under our Foreign Assistance Act that says the president is authorized to provide training and education to foreign militaries to make them more professional, to make them more capable, and so on. And so these are the kinds of things where either we bring officers from a foreign military to attend school in the United States, or we send trainers out and train foreign militaries in their own countries. So the sanction applies to anything being funded under that authority, and so that what we're saying is because of the waiver now we're going to go ahead with whatever I said it was, 250,000 or something in 200,000 in IMET.
Okay. My last question, Mark. In Somalia, there are more than 25,000 African Union troops in Mogadishu or in the southern Somalia. And the fight against Al-Shabaab is being carried out, both Somali army and the African Union troops. Are you aware any steps taken by the African Union troops to prevent any child soldier within the Somali army?
Within the Somali army or within their own?
Within, because African Union not recruiting a child soldier, but Somalis are being accused of recruiting child soldiers.
Yeah, I don't know if AU as such is doing it. The UN certainly has worked with them.
I'm not confident to say anything on the record, but I would suspect there'd be some kind of training, but I'm not sure.
We'll see if we can get you.
Let's see if we can get you an answer on that one.
To some degree, it's a matter of jurisdiction. When we're talking about the Somali National Army, we're working with them bilaterally to deal with this issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also working with the United Nations. The AU is responsible for a different mission, right? It's the African mission for Somalia, AMISOM. So we can look into it, but my my thought is that MSOM is under AU authority, whereas the child soldier issue within the Somali National Army is more of a bilateral or UN issue.
Do you have any more questions?
I just have one more on the Burma situation. Of course, we've seen some high-level government visits to Burma this
Yeah.
year. Is this something that is brought onto the table when Secretary Kerry goes?
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah,
you
we've
are
had-
raising it at that level. You know,
Yeah,
because
I mean,
you would
we've
think
had
it might be some.
engagement at the level of the president, the secretary, our boss, Tom Malinowski, assistant secretary, has been out, and this gets talked about. And we even had the deputy commander of Pacific Command went with Tom to Burma and gave a talk at the military college there, and basically was giving a good speech on how we see professional militaries and their treatment on human rights grounds, and child soldiers, of course, is one of the many human rights issues. So we're trying to be sure this gets seeded around. Again, the goal here is not to punish people for their bad behavior, but to persuade them to change it and to help them change it and to bring about a situation where you don't have continued recruitment of child soldiers. But I think Burma may be a good example, as you alluded. We've seen some real improvements on the human rights front in Burma over the last few years, and we've tried to encourage that. That has improved the relationship between the two countries quite a bit. But it doesn't mean that some improvement results in total, a totally beautiful relationship. As long as there are issues like this, we'll continue to raise them. That's been our policy from the beginning. They called it action for action, which was that when you saw improvements on their side, that would allow us to do certain things. And that's what we're saying here, is that it's not that we want to keep Burma on the list for child soldiers forever and ever. It's that we're saying you need to do more to take the steps that will get you off that list. And as I indicated at the lead, we've had the example this year of Chad, who'd been on there for some time, took the steps and got off, and we're happy about that. That's a success, and mostly for the Chadians that it's a success. So that's what we're looking for and hoping for here, and that's what we're trying to modulate this so that the message to these governments is, you can't, when you improve, it's going to improve your situation with us. We'll help you do that. We're not trying to punish you. We're trying to help you to do the right thing. And so get with the program. And hopefully that will have that effect.